The topic that I decided to talk about today is early abuse and violence. But before I start with that, I want to start about talking about the brain. So basically, the brain is made up with a whole bunch of neurons, and in between these neurons, there's the septic cleft, or the space in between each neuron. But in between the neurons talk to each other, kind of. They communicate with each other, and they communicate using neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters they regulate the aspects of behavior and emotion and the ability to make decisions. So anything can really affect these neurotransmitters in the brain, but what I decided to talk about was early abuse and violence in the brain, or early abuse and violence in the life that affect the brain. So violence doesn't necessarily have to mean, or abuse doesn't necessarily have to mean physical abuse. It can be mental abuse. It can be any kind of abuse. So if there's stress in the home, there can be some sort of neurological effect to the person. The most serious cases of abuse happen before the age of 5, because that's when the most synaptic growth is happening. So that's when the most connections between the neurons are happening. That's when the brain is starting to take its full form and connect all together. During before the age of 5, that's when the most social skills are developed in the brain regions are the most vulnerable. So if something happens to this child or in this child's life that causes some sort of stress to either physically the body or just mental stress in general, it can have a neurological effect. So, for example, the case of Bobby Joe Long, his mother and him lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and they were sleeping in the same bed together. They were always together, and the mom would bring home different men at night. So he was around a whole lot of people on top of having the genetic disorder that he did have. So that caused a lot of stress on him, and that made him a very violent and a very angry person. If these neurons in your brain aren't connected correctly, you don't have the right release of dopamine and serotonin and any kind of chemicals that your brain needs to control and regulate its personality. So, if anything happens to a child, stress in a home, as I said, then it can affect it. It can kill off or not connect correctly the way that it's supposed to. Most children that have had a stressful home before the age of 5, or a abusive or violent home before the age of 5, they usually start acting out and being rebellious or violent around the age of 7, and it progresses until the age of 14. So that's when it's the most predominant. That's when it really starts, and when really you can notice that something is wrong, something is going on. But not all violent, not all stressed or emotionally or abused children become violent children. So it does have other effects, and it all depends on how the person can take it. My personal opinion on it is I think that early abuse or violence does have a huge impact on a child's life, and it does have a huge impact on whether or not the child may or may not be violent. But I also think it is other factors. I do think that it's a neurological thing, and I think that if there was something wrong with the child beforehand, like the Bobby Long case, how he did already previously have this chromosome deficiency, and then he had this stressful life, I believe that it wasn't just one or the other. I believe it was both of them working interconnectedly. I think that if some child has a abusive or violent home, it does not whatsoever mean that they are going to go out and be a violent person as their own. Just like I think that if a child has some sort of deficiency, a brain deficiency, a body deficiency, some sort of anything, I don't think that they're going to push and be violent as they get older. I think that it's an interconnection of both. I don't think it's one or the other. So, yeah.